I do not actually like 24mm field of view for making YouTube videos. f2.8 is definitely too slow for a prime. This thing is pretty noisy when autofocusing. So why would you want to buy this? And for the impatient ones, this is really easy. The size, the weight, the price, and most of all, its almost macro capabilities and the reproduction. One note before going forward, if you're getting this lens with the Sony a7 IV and the continuous autofocus is not working well, you need to upgrade this thing to the latest firmware. Fortunately, you can do it by mounting the lens into the camera, plugging the camera to your computer, and using Tamron's upgrade suite software piece of upgrading thing. Can be done, it works perfectly right after that. There are a lot of people that really like the 24mm field of view for making YouTube videos in this type of studio, whatever room in your house that you're making YouTube videos situation. 24mm in full frame. That's why the Sigma 16mm f1.4 is so popular with APS-C cameras like the Sony a6400 or the Canon's M something, but it's not my favorite one. For me, the one that I like the most is the 35mm focal length, and that's the reason why that's what I'm using right now, and I'm shooting with the Sony a7 IV and the 35mm f1.8. Since I find this focal length too wide for these indoor videos, is it good enough for vlogging? And the question was, can you vlog with it? The answer is, well, kind of. My hand is quite outstretched. This is heavy enough to be annoying. And to be honest, I would prefer something a little bit wider. The reason is that at least with the a7 IV, for this to work, I need to have the active stabilization on, and it crops quite a bit. So this is maybe a little bit too tight. So I would rather much prefer to have the 20mm from Tamron also, which again gets more expensive. And for vlogging, I think that the best option for the a7 IV would be the Sony 20mm f1.8, but that gets really expensive. So can you vlog with this? Sure you can. Is it ideal? No, it isn't. Also, I hope this segment makes sense because it's recorded maybe 2 or 3 months after the previous one. This is how long it took for me to find both the time and the day that it was not totally dark outside. So here we are. But I forgot my spikes. So let's test just for a moment the walking on ice, which I wouldn't recommend. And that's why I use this vlog with action cameras. I finally found some gravel. The other question about can you vlog with this is the background blurry enough but not too blurry? Well, 24mm with a crop, f2.8, maybe not as much as one would hope, but it's pretty nice. And you would have troubles to get something similar, or it would be more difficult with a smaller sensor. So go full frame. And of course, the closer you get, the more blurry background. But I don't think you want to see this. Hand straight, this is proper framing with some blur. And yes, now we have changed the setup here indoors. So now we are recording again with the a7 IV, but we have the 24mm f2.8 at f2.8 on the camera. This is okay. The background is not as blurred as I would like it to be. I don't quite like the composition and the distortion or the... Anyway, the proportions of my face gets at this distance from the camera, which is what happens. Details in a different video. So I don't like this as much as the 35mm. And now you can see how it looks in this situation. But if the blurry background is the issue, why not get a faster Aperture 24mm lens? Well, there are a couple of somewhat economical alternatives, one from Samyang and another one from Viltrox, and then of course we have the G Master from Sony, but it gets a bit expensive. And again, that's not the reason for me to get 24mm, is not for these videos, but for the differentiating feature from this 24 to the rest of the 24mm lenses for the Sony mount, and that is its macro capabilities. If you want, by the way, information about vignetting, distortion, corner-to-corner sharpness and all these things, you will have to check a different review. In this one, I'm focusing on preferences, use cases, how it looks in a practical scenario, and if you want that very detailed information, I'm sure you can find some other suitable reviews. But in a nutshell, this is definitely sharp enough for me. But now to my particular use case and why I got this lens. Basically, it's for the macro thing. It's not a true macro in the sense that it does not do a 1-to-1 reproduction ratio, but it gets to 1-to-2, which is much more and much better than all the other 24mm lenses that you can get for the Sony full frame system. And why is it that I use this particular lens for this purpose? Mostly for B-roll. So usually my workflow is I use the 35mm to make the talking head video, and then I use the 24mm to do some B-roll. So I literally do the talking head to the camera, then I step out and I start showing things to the camera. Hopefully the audio was properly captured. So I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna show the back of it, and I'm gonna hold it like this, and things like that, which are useful to hide all the jump cuts that I need to make because I'm reading from a script. And you might be wondering, how close does it actually get? Let's test it out. I'm literally gonna step to that direction right now. And that was quite close in my opinion. On the closest focusing distance, I was basically putting this inside of the hood of the lens. And that's pretty damn close. Okay, so what alternatives do we have? Let me take my notes. And let me mention the price, which is one of the main competitive advantages of this lens compared to its 24mm brethren for the Sony full frame cameras. So this Tamron f2.8 24mm prime lens with a macro or quasi-macro capabilities, and I'm gonna give you the price of these lenses new. It goes here in Europe for about 260 euros. The 24mm f1.4 G Master is 1,700 euros, which is quite a few times more. Sony has the 24mm f2.8 G lens, which has the same slow aperture and definitely not the same close focusing capabilities, and that goes for 750 euros, which is almost 3 times more. And then Samyang has 3 different options in the 24mm focal lens for Sony full frame, which is quite a few actually. They have one f2.8, which is very tiny, pancake, lovely little lens. It is 310 euros, which means that it's actually even more expensive than the Tamron, but it does not have the close focusing capabilities. It is smaller, it is more pancakey, so it has its own lovely features, but for my use case, which is close focusing, the Tamron is definitely the one to go. Samyang does also a 24mm f1.8, which at least here in Finland can be found somewhere between 380 to 500 euros, and that makes it a very, very interesting choice for those of you that want a 24mm lens with a somewhat fast aperture, but are not ready to spend 1,700 euros on a G Master. And finally, one of the newest additions, which they look very interesting for me, are video-centric autofocus Samyang lenses for Sony full-frame cameras. So they have this 24mm t1.9. I assume that optically is quite similar to the photography focused f1.8, but it has a bit different functionality and build, and that one goes for 670 euros. And finally, there is a Viltrox 24mm f1.8 also, and that one I think it goes for somewhere between 300 and 400 euros. Regardless, more expensive than the Tamron, no close focusing capabilities. So the Tamron from all of this list is the cheapest, it's not even the slowest, it's definitely the macroest, and when you think about the price use case, in my case, which is the close focusing distance ratio, is definitely the best one. And on top of it, I bought it secondhand for just 200 euros. And Tamron in this same series has three different options: 20mm f2.8, this 24mm f2.8, and a 35mm f2.8. Now a question is why I got the 24 and not any of the other two. The first one is that I have not found a good deal yet second hand of the other two, but I might get them. The 35mm I'm quite likely going to skip because I already have the 35 f1.8 and it's lovely, and if I want the close focusing capabilities, I actually kind of like the field of view of the 24mm from Tamron, so I'm gonna skip that one. The 20mm f2.8, that's interesting because of a much wider field of view, maybe for vlogging purposes or to a bit more extremes. However, because of the f2.8 and even wider field of view, you would get more challenges to get any blurriness in the background, which you might want to do. And in that case, the Sony alternative, it's popular and for good reason. Sony has a 20mm f1.8, which I think is a great option for Sony full frame vlogging purposes, but it is about €1,000. And the Tamron 20mm f2.8, it's 1/3 of that price. Still, the 20mm is significantly more expensive than the 24 and the 35, so I'm gonna wait for a really good deal if it ever comes. But I'm very happy with this Tamron for this particular use case. Are you considering any of these lenses? Have you wondered why are they much cheaper? Why would you use them instead of some of the competition? Why to get just an f2.8 prime? But maybe this close focusing capabilities is what you were looking for, and in that case, you might be interested in getting one or at least going to try it. And I hope you liked the video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and we're gonna see you soon for some more content.